Hi, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. It is indeed an exciting edition. Speaking on this episode with someone who knows the world of adrenaline very well. I believe this is a person who does deep sea diving and spelunking and also deep dives into editing, and that is author James Rollins. May I call you James?
That please do, or Jim is fine even.
All right, all right. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Glad to have you on. Folks out there will know you for the Sigma Force series, some of my favorites of which are Bone Labyrinth and Kingdom of Bones. And then I'm also a fan of Amazonia. That's one of my favorites of yours. And I know that you have the Godslayer yes, series, as well as Archangel. So,
Yep, got a few
and
books
that's
out. I think I'm writing my 44th book right now. So
I was gonna say that's the tip of the iceberg. There's so many.
yeah,
Yeah.
it keeps me busy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and certainly exciting plots, exciting storylines, and we'll talk a little bit about that balance as we go through. But I'm curious about what connected you to the written word. I know you lived a life as a veterinarian that then sort of flipped into author. So curious about that initial connection.
Yeah, my clients were wondering the same thing. When what's wrong with their veterinarian? He's suddenly writing books, and I had posters in my lobby. Get your cat spayed, get a free book.
Oh, hmm.
So they had the same questions like, "What are you doing, Jim? You have a successful veterinary hospital. What's this deal with writing?" Well, go back into the past. I mean, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. That was my career path from a young age. I've told this many times at different interviews and book talks that, I remember from third grade, I got that assignment that a teacher's going to give you, go home, write a little paragraph about what you want to be when you grow up.
Hmm.
To this day, I remember sitting at my desk, had a blank sheet of paper in front of me, knew I wanted to be a veterinarian. Only problem, didn't know how to spell it. So I went out and got a dictionary, looked it up. That determined to be a veterinarian. And I could put policeman or fireman and, flew through that little paragraph, but I was that determined to be a veterinarian. So that's my career track towards, that was, junior high, high school, college was always, geared towards getting into vet school. Um, Unfortunately, I read a lot growing up, and I also had three brothers and three sisters. So they were always my target for my audience for my first foray into storytelling. My goal growing up was to terrorize my younger brothers and sisters with the weirdest stories, get them to believe the most outlandish things, and if tears were involved, all the better. So that was this part of my brain that loves animals, loves science, loves weather. This side, a little more twisted, a little weirder. Um, and reading's like throwing gasoline on this side of my brain, So that's always a part of my personality was to love to tell stories. And I never took any formal writing classes because, again, I didn't think that was a career path for me. It was just something at the back of my mind. I think if you read a lot, you think, oh, wouldn't it be cool if I wrote a book myself? And walk into a bookstore and there's my book right there. That'd be so cool. But it seemed like a pipe dream. Didn't seem like there's no practical path to that. It seemed like you do this, this, and this, you become a veterinarian. You could do this, this, and this, and fail horribly as an author. So I went down the other path. Um, but after time, that I kept, even though I had a very busy practice, I went from being an employed vet to having my own clinic for 15 years, and eventually had like 23 employees, and so life got quite busy. It didn't seem like I could fit writing in my life. But eventually I hired another veterinarian. And for just a brief period of time, I realized my workload went from here down just a fraction, just a tiny little fraction. I thought, well, what am I going to do with all this free time, that little tiny little sliver of opportunity? And I thought, well, I've been talking about writing, and I had heard about a writing club in Sacramento where my practice was. And I thought, I'm going to go to that writing club and just see what's going on over there. And I found out that it's basically have a large organization and thousands of members, but it's everything. It's poetry, nonfiction, fiction, uh, memoirs. But I found out that in that group there was they all say broke up into little critique groups, and I found a critique group that dealt with speculative fiction. That was anything, fiction on the fringes, um,
Hmm.
science fiction, fantasy, horror, scientific thrillers, anything that along those lines. And so I joined that critique group, and then I thought, well, of course, I have to submit work to this critique group. So I began just working on short stories. For 4 years, I submitted short stories to the group and workshopped them and tried to get them sold, and did not succeed in selling one short story to any magazine. And I was sending them out to any magazine that might vaguely be related to that story. You were going to get my story. And they
Hmm.
all uniformly said no. So based on that amount of success, I decided I'm going to write a novel. So I just began, tinkering with it. Just slowly working through. It took about 11 months to finally have this first story finished, and I began submitting it, and it was equally rejected by the publishing world as my short stories were. But eventually, after 49 rejections from different agents, the 50th agent said, "Hey, this, I can. This looks like a diamond in the rough to me. I think I might have a chance to sell this." And she did. And then one book became two, two became four. And suddenly there was more demand on my time from writing. So it was I was sort of pulled two different directions. And so slowly over the course of about 3 or 4 years, I went from owning the clinic, then I sold the clinic, then I still worked with the corporate group that bought the clinic, went from full-time to part-time to weekends, and said, okay, I'm out of here. So I still do some
Hmm.
volunteer work. I still haven't totally abandoned my prior career. I work with a group that traps feral cats, wildcats, and I spend one Sunday a month for 8 hours spaying and neutering them. And as I tell people, basically all I now do with my veterinary degree is just remove genitalia. So that's my outlet on this side still. So
Yeah.
that's how that came about. It's a weird process. I mean, a lot of lawyers become authors, and a lot of medical doctors become authors. But I think at this point, I'm still the only thriller writer that ventured off the path from veterinary medicine. Some of the veterinarians will write nonfiction books or dog related books, but I'm the one that just went. I strayed way off the path.
Well, a unique path and definitely one of persistence as you're talking about that R word, the authors face, all authors face rejection and that belief in yourself and continuing forward and the 50th agent, really appreciating that.
Yeah, why I know it's 50 is that my insulation against rejection, and some of the rejections were fairly harsh. Usually they're just, occasionally somebody will, maybe handwrite you something. Usually they're just form rejection letters, dear sir, ma'am, we hate your book. Don't submit to us again. Thank you. Uh,
Mhm.
so my goal against that the sting of that rejection was I sent out 10 batches of queries to different agents. And depending upon the number that came back in my mailbox that day, if I got like one back, I had to make sure I send out another. If the two came back, I'd have to send out two. So I always had basically 10 floating out there. So there was always, even though this guy rejected me, there's all these other possibilities out there. So that's why I know it was the last that fifth batch of submissions where the last entry finally said, hey, I think I can sell that.
Mhm. Wow. And one of the things I also enjoy about your books is that there's very often the afterword, the afterpiece, where you're talking about the research, you're talking about the background, the details, and how the story came to be. So just peering over your shoulder at the books that you're surrounded by, I'm curious about that research process and what that's like, how that informs your work.
If anybody reads my book, they probably think, oh, he does a lot of research. And I don't know if that's an insult or if that's a compliment, because I mean, am I putting too much research in there? Am I boring people? Is that what they're commenting on that? Because I love the subject matters that I write about. I love weird science. I like historical mysteries. I grew up reading, Clive Cussler and Tom Clancy. So there's all that sort of military aspect I'm always intrigued about writing about. And so typically my process, for lack of a better term, is I will research a novel for 90 days, and that's a gamut of different, whether it's internet, whether it's going to the library, whether it's talking to scientists or historians. I do my big research for 90 days. The 91st day, I have to write. I found that if I don't, I fell into a trap with Sandstorm where I just kept researching and researching and researching and realized
Mm.
there's no book coming out. And I've got a deadline that I'm committed to. So I now realize I have to sort of do all my big research those first 90 days. And then afterwards, every single day, there's more research. There's something you got to check, details that you have to follow up on. So continually, it's a continual ongoing process all the way to the end of the book. But why I added that sort of what's true, what's not section at the end of my book was because I am dabbling with some fairly esoteric topics, and I'm looking beyond the fringe and where things are heading to. So I am blurring the line between reality and fiction, as well as I can, and hopefully make it feel seamless. But I also did that for a couple other reasons. Number one, I used to get a lot of. If you look at my early work, you won't find that section in my early books. You won't find that in Subterranean or Excavation or Deep Fathom or Ice Hunt or even Amazonia doesn't have it. Um, I did it because eventually I started getting a lot of emails from people saying, where did you get this information from? Or is this true? Is that true? And rather than having to constantly answer emails repeating the same question over and over again, I thought I'm just going to put it all at the end of the story. But I did it for another reason also, is that I got a 1-star Amazon review. Not that I get them occasionally. I'm not going to say that I'm flawless, but this one was one that was pretty particularly irksome in that this reviewer is like, I was really enjoying Jim's latest book and it was clicking along really well. And I was really enjoying it, but I got to this part of the story and this thing happened and it was so outlandish. That's so ridiculous. No one's going to believe that. And it just it's like he's jumping the shark here. I couldn't even finish this because it was so outlandish. And I'm thinking in my head, the thing that he was tripping over was not something I made up. That was factual.
Mm.
Uh, because that old line, truth is stranger than fiction, is that even though it's truthful, it sounds like fiction. It sounds like something I'm making up, and it's so unusual and out of the ordinary that people are thinking, oh, he's just making that up, and what a silly thing to make up because I don't believe it. So the other reason I do that is to lay out exactly how much reality really is in a story that feels fairly fictional. So, anyways.
Well, going back to the question of if it's a compliment or not, I love that grounding in reality research, and I appreciate that process. That I know that takes time and is very time consuming as you're working through. So, intended as a compliment. Absolutely.
I enjoy it. I mean, I like what's cool I found, and I didn't realize this until I was, began writing, was that scientists in particular are happy to talk about their work to almost anybody. I think they're tired, they're getting that blank look from their husband or wife when they try to explain something. But if they got an avid audience, they're like, I'll tell you everything. And it's like, oh, well, the nuclear codes were what? Let me just jot that down. Uh, it's surprising what they'll actually admit and tell you about this stuff. So a lot of that, because again, I'm writing scientific thrillers. I want the science to be accurate, A, and B, by the time the book comes out, I don't want it to be proven false or for the science to dramatically change by the time my book comes out because publishing is a slow process. I've got to come up with my idea, got to do those 90 days of research. I got to spend 6 months writing the book, got to spend another month or two, polishing and editing it with the editor. And then still it's going to take another anywhere from 8, 9, 10 months before it actually hits the shelves. So you're talking about basically a 2-year process. So, science is not static, and that over 2 years that can change dramatically. So when I'm talking to scientists, I like to ask them, not, don't tell me what, is coming out in a book you're writing or even a journal article that you're working on. Look behind your shoulder and tell me what's on your workbench. So I need that level of immediacy so that when I put it in the book, it's still going to feel fresh 2 years from now when it comes out. So it's amazing what, I've been to, was invited to Fermi Labs outside of Chicago, big, physics lab. That was really cool. I learned all about how the universe could be a holographic projection of, and maybe not be real. In June, I'm heading over to Cold Harbor Research Institute, it's a biological research institute, where I'm doing a panel and I'm going to pick their brains there too. So
Mhm.
it's able to have access to these esoteric bits of science out there.
Oh, God. What's it like to plan these long-ranging sort of series arcs? Because I mentioned Sigma Force, you have Godslayer. How does the plotting go for those types of projects?
Well, I didn't initially want to do a series. Again, if you look at my early thrillers, they're all standalone,
Hmm.
Amazonian standalone. Um, it was only, and I kept getting pressure from my publishing house. They want a series. It's easier for them to sell a series. Series are easier for them to market. You can start building an audience that sort of snowballs, and so it's a good pathway for to get an author recognition. But I had a innate reason I didn't want to do it. First, I was already doing a series in the fantasy world. And in a fantasy, basically a multi-volume series in fantasy is basically one long story just chopped up into four, X number of bits. Um, Whereas a series in a thriller, you're basically having self-contained adventure with the same set of characters that gets repeated over and over again. And I didn't really want to do that with the thrillers because I had some problems with the whole idea of a series concept in that it's what I jokingly refer to as the Jessica Fletcher syndrome, where for the, here's this character from this old woman from Cabot Cove from Murder She Wrote that every single week she's stumbling over a dead body. In my 60 plus years of existence on this planet, I've never stumbled over a dead body. So you wonder why this woman is always stumbling over dead bodies. And so it begins to strain your suspension of disbelief that that one character is always getting into such problems. But it's also hard to maintain jeopardy. And I like to scare my readers. I want them thinking that nobody's safe. And with a recurring character, let's say somebody pulls a gun on Jessica Fletcher in an episode, that, she's never going to get shot because you've read TV Guide, if there's another episode of Murder She Wrote next week. Therefore, you can, enjoy it from a philosophical standpoint, but if you're not really engaged from that gut root, oh my God, she's going to die. So it wasn't until I wrote Sandstorm, which I described as sort of the prequel to the Sigma Force universe. I wrote Sandstorm not thinking it was the beginning of anything bigger. Sigma Force is sort of a supporting character in the larger story. The main characters are not Sigma Force characters. Sigma Force supports them. But I like this idea of these, former special forces soldiers that have been retrained in scientific disciplines that are released into the world to protect us against various threats, basically scientists with guns. I like the fact that could be a group of characters. And so I realized I can actually get a little bit around the Jessica Fletcher syndrome by basing a series on a group of characters. Therefore, the jeopardy can come from many different directions. Um, more importantly, is that if I do great bodily harm to a character or kill off a character, that they can always recruit a new member, that no one is
Hmm.
necessarily safe. So I've done major cruel things to a lot of my characters. There's been deaths that were unexpected. There's been maimings that were unexpected. So I would like to keep my readers on the toes, thinking, I don't know if anybody's necessarily safe in that universe, and that's a good place to be.
Definitely turns the pages for sure. Yeah. What's that balance like of leading with characters, but then also including the suspense, all of the action, all of those kind of the set pieces that come with that genre?
That's the one thing I do enjoy about the Sigma universe in that in my goal is to build a big roller coaster ride. But at the same time, I'm there's some negatives in dealing with series in that you're going to have to every book I like to think that well, I don't think I think very few people have read the entire Sigma Force in order, just out of the blue. I think most people just jump in wherever, and if they like that story, hopefully they'll go back and fill in the blanks from the previous stories. 'Cause I build them to be self-contained. I don't want, if there's any backstory that you need to know for that book, I'm going to tell you in that book. Therefore, yes, you're getting a nuance of character arc across the breadth of the series. If you're reading in order, or even if you're reading it out of order, you'll put that together. But I don't want you to have to do that. I want you to be able to enjoy the book all by itself. So I try to, fold in that backstory while also keeping the main story engaged and moving forward, which is a little bit of a juggling act to reintroduce the world, reintroduce the character, and get the big threat recognized and get that roller coaster, clicking along and pushed off the rails. Um, but yeah, I mean, my goal at this point is just I don't work from a detailed outline. I work from a fairly skeletal outline. I know before I begin a novel, I know the science, I know the history, I know the locations that are going to occur in the story. I know the beginning and I know the end, and I know the tent poles that are going to set up that story. The tent poles usually are the big action sequences. What do I need to accomplish to get to that last goal? So preset those up. But otherwise, I don't know necessarily how A gets to B goes to C. To me, I don't know how they're going to connect until I begin writing it. I found in the past if I try to outline it in too great detail, I get bored then because then there's no surprises for me as a writer. Then it's just me just cranking it out and it's not very interesting. Whereas if I don't necessarily know what's happening, if I paint my characters into a corner, like I don't know how to get them out of this corner, neither is my readers. So if I paint in the corner, then I know it's a good corner I painted them in. Because if I can't think of a solution right off the hand, right off the bat, then neither is those readers. So I like having a little bit of ability to, back myself into a corner at times.
It's, time for a long walk, time to think about the best way to get the characters out.
Exactly. And there's been many, 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 many long walks or actually drives. If I'm out to I'll take a long drive and, part of your brain is, paying attention to the road. Another part of you is, somewhere back in the back of your brain, there's some elves back there, trying to fiddle together the right answer to that problem.
Yeah, the creative process and all of its mysteries for sure.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I know that when we jumped on, you had been deep in the jungles of editing. So anything that you'd like to say about the work forward and where people can find out more information?
Sure. I am working on the fourth and final volume of a fantasy series called the Moonfall series. It's set on a planet that circles its sun with one side always facing the sun, one side eternally in darkness. The only livable area is the sort of band between those two extremes. And so it's a big quest to try to figure out how to get that planet spinning, because if they don't get that planet spinning, the moon's going to crash into the planet and destroy all life. So that is the big quest of that story. I've got a standalone that's finished that's coming out later on this year. And I've always sort of mixed my Sigma stories with some standalones. I haven't done a standalone in a long time, so I had this idea for a standalone. So that's coming out. It's called Trust No One. It comes out at the end of the year. And right now I'm doing my research for the Sigma novel after that. So it never stops.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And I know you have a website. Anything that you'd like to
Yes.
say about social media or those kind of connections?
Yeah, if you go to jamesrollins.com, it's what I describe as sort of the encyclopedia of James Rollins. Has all my books and titles and, introductory chapters and Q&A. And there's even a section if you are an author or want to be an author, there's like a how-to tip section on my website. But of course, it's no avoiding social media. So you'll find me on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, or X, I should say now. So it's fun. I like it and I hate it. Social media. There's an obligation that ties you down to having to, keep doing that. But at the same time, it's nice having that connection with your audience that you didn't have in the past. Back when I first started writing, back in the late 90s when my first book was published,
Hmm.
nobody had even websites. I had a website, and so I was like, "Oh, you're cutting edge, Jim. You have a website." So social media didn't exist. So I remember talking to my editor, and I was saying, "Hey, there's this new thing called Facebook, and I think I might be able to use it to, communicate to my readership and use it as a marketing tool." And she goes, "Oh, don't waste your time. That's just a flash in the pan. Just keep writing." Now, of course, if any authors that get hired by HarperCollins are like, "Okay, now you have to go to your social media class. We're going to teach you everything you need to know about social media." So it's become so important. But I also like it. It's a good sounding board. Um, I oftentimes pose questions to my social media followers about details. Like at one point is I introduced another dog that's going to accompany Tucker and Kane, another military working dog, it's a pup. And I was going to give the name, I was going to name the pup at the end of the book where the pup is introduced, but I could not, and that was Kingdom of Bones. I could not think of the dog's name. So I just posed, you know, tell me what you think the dog's name is because I can't think of one. So I got 4,000 submissions of names for that dog. that pup appears in Archangel with his name now. But it's nice having that sounding board through social media, that immediacy that where you can just sort of get feedback from people. At one point, Gray, sort of the team commander of Sigma Force, is um, sort of caught between, or he's balanced between two women that he's possibly going to be romantically involved with, or either Rachel or say Sean. And I remember ending the book, and he's in bed with somebody, and I didn't know who he was in bed with. I couldn't figure it out either. It could be either of them. So again, in social media, I just said, who would you want him to be in bed with? And so I got and why? So I got a lot of great feedback from that. So it's a great deal of fun to pose questions like that to the those that follow me on social media.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I will say, tying back to the veterinarian background, you have me invested with the dog characters as well, I have to say.
Yeah, trust me. There's a part in the Kingdom of Bones, which you've read, where
Hmm.
sounds like Kane's in something bad might have happened to Kane, and I got a lot of hate mail. They said, I stopped reading right here. I couldn't believe what you did to Kane, so I will never read you again. It's like, please keep reading.
Yes, and yeah, I'm glad I did keep reading. Absolutely. No spoilers, of course, or anything like that. But glad to have you on anytime. And have we missed anything that you would want to mention that we've not touched on?
Uh, what else? This has been released on social media. Is that my Sigma Force series has been picked up by Amazon MGM to be a potential streaming series. So right now, they're still moving forward. They have a script and they're looking at to attach talent. So hopefully, we'll see that get fully greenlit and make it out to screen. But who knows? Hollywood's fickle.
Yeah, as it should be, as it should be. May it be so.
So we'll see.
Yeah, yeah.
That's all.
Uh,
Otherwise, nothing going on here.
well, it sounds like you certainly have more than enough. I'm always glad to see a new book from you. And as I said, always an open invitation to chat here, and many thanks for the time.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate it.